My father called me at 2:47 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because I was sitting in the pickup line at Greenfield Elementary, watching the dashboard clock tick toward 3 o'clock. And when his name appeared on my phone, I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken in 9 days. The last conversation had ended with me hanging up on him mid-sentence because he'd started talking about supply chains again, about how the trucks would stop running before anyone noticed. And I'd told him I couldn't do this anymore, that I loved him, but I couldn't keep living inside his anxiety. I picked up because something in me, some daughter sense I've never been able to name, recognized that he'd never called during school pickup before. He knew my schedule. He respected its edges even when he respected nothing else. "Ellie," his voice was flat. Not the manic energy I'd learned to brace against. Not the rapid-fire citations from forums I'd stopped reading. Flat, controlled. The voice of a man who had already made every decision he was going to make. "I need you to listen to me without arguing. Can you do that?" "Dad, I'm in the pickup line." "Leave the car." I laughed. It came out wrong, too sharp, too fast. "What?" "When the kids come out, take them by the hand and walk north on Ridgeline. Don't go home. Don't get back in the car. Walk north until you reach the Metzger property fence line. I'll be there with the truck. You have maybe 3 hours. 3 hours until what?" He was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. Then, I built something under the north field. You know the equipment shed that never had equipment in it? Underneath. It's been ready for 6 years. I should have told you sooner. I should have told you a lot of things sooner. "Dad, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared. But not of me. Never of me." His breath caught. Something I'd never heard before, a thickness, a tremor he couldn't smooth. "Ellie, I am asking you to trust me one more time. I know what that costs. I know I've spent most of what I had with you. But I'm asking." The line of minivans moved forward. A crossing guard waved. My daughter B appeared at the school door, holding her lunchbox by its broken strap, scanning the cars. Behind her, my son Jonas was talking to a teacher, gesturing at something on his jacket. They were 7 and 10. They were ordinary. They were Tuesday afternoon ordinary. 3 hours until what? I said again. Until it doesn't matter whether you believe me. I sat there with the engine running, watching my children move toward me through the bright afternoon. Everything looked the same. The same crossing guard, the same handmade banner on the fence for the spring fundraiser, the same cluster of parents checking phones. And my father's breathing in my ear, steady now, waiting for my answer. "I'll be at the fence line," I said. I didn't know why I said it. I still don't. Maybe I heard the thing in his voice that wasn't fear, that was past fear, already on the other side of it, already in the territory of pure decision. Maybe 6 years of watching him build and hoard and plan had worn a groove in me that responded before my rational mind could intervene. Or maybe I just loved him. And love sometimes looks like obedience to people watching from outside. I turned off the engine. I got out of the car. B saw me walking toward her on foot, and her face did something complicated confusion first, then a smile. Because Mom, walking meant something different, something special. Jonas looked up from his conversation and waved. I took their hands and started walking north. The first 20 minutes were almost pleasant. Early May in Western Oregon, the light still golden, the air carrying that particular sweetness of cut grass and warm pavement. B wanted to know why we were walking. Jonas wanted to know where the car was. I told them we were meeting Grandpa for a surprise, which wasn't a lie. I didn't know what it was yet. Ridgeline Road runs north out of town, past the old lumber mill and the Methodist church, then climbs gradually into the foothills where the properties get bigger and the houses get farther apart. My father's land, 40 acres he bought in 2009 when he sold his half of the contracting business, sits at the end of a gravel road that branches off Ridgeline about 2 miles from the school. I'd walked it before, on summer evenings when I brought the kids to visit, but never with this particular weight in my chest, never watching the road behind me. Jonas noticed first. "Mom, why do you keep looking back?" "Just checking for cars, buddy." "There aren't any cars." He was right. The road was empty. At 3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, Ridgeline should have had at least a handful of vehicles, parents heading home, delivery trucks, the mail carrier. Nothing. The quiet pressed in. My phone buzzed. A text from my husband, Marcos. "Tried calling office line down. News saying something about CDC alert. You see anything?" I typed back, "Taking kids to Dad's. Will explain when I can. Are you okay?" 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, at the hospital until 6. They're saying some kind of chemical spill protocol. Locking down the ward. What do you mean, Dad's? Marcos worked as a radiology tech at St. Francis, 20 minutes south. We'd been married 11 years. He thought my father was a paranoid man who loved his grandchildren and meant well, but couldn't be trusted with reality. He wasn't wrong about any of it. But he also wasn't here. And I was walking north with our kids. And something in the quality of the silence around us had shifted in a way I couldn't articulate. "Come to the north field when you get out," I typed. "The equipment shed. Please trust me." He didn't respond. I kept walking. Bea started to tire at mile 1. She was 7 and her legs were short, and she'd been carrying her lunchbox the whole way because I hadn't thought to take it from her. I hoisted her onto my hip, and Jonas took the lunchbox without being asked. He was watching me with that particular intensity he'd developed in the last year, 10 years old, and already reading adult anxiety like a native language. I hated that. I hated that my father had given him that skill by making our family a place where you needed it. "Mom," Jonas said quietly as we passed the Methodist church, its parking lot empty, its doors closed on a Tuesday. "Is this about Grandpa's stuff?" He meant the preparations, the conversations he'd overheard, the reasons we'd stopped visiting as often. I'd tried to shield them from the worst of it, but children metabolize what their parents won't say. "I don't know yet," I told him. "But Grandpa asked us to come, and I said yes." He nodded, adjusted the lunchbox strap, walked a little faster. My father's truck was at the fence line, a white F250 with rust around the wheel wells, parked just inside the cattle gate, where the Metzger property ends and his begins. He was standing outside it, not leaning, not relaxed, standing the way men stand when they've rehearsed standing there. When they've imagined this moment so many times that living it becomes a kind of performance. He looked older than 9 days should have allowed. His face had a drawn quality, cheekbones too prominent, eyes too deep in their sockets. He was wearing work clothes, canvas jacket, steel-toed boots, and his hands were at his sides, but I could see the tension in his fingers, the way they curled and uncurled. "Grandpa!" Bea squirmed off my hip and ran to him, and something broke in his face. He caught her and lifted her and held her against his chest and closed his eyes, and for 3 seconds he was just a grandfather holding his granddaughter in the May sunshine, and nothing was wrong anywhere. Then he opened his eyes and looked at me over her head, and I saw it. The thing I'd heard on the phone. He wasn't afraid. He was grieving. He was already grieving something that hadn't fully happened yet. And the grief was so complete that it had moved past panic into a strange, terrible calm. "Get in the truck," he said. "Both of you, quickly." "Dad!" "Ellie, look south." I turned. From the slight elevation of the fence line, you could see back down ridgeline toward town. The school was invisible behind the trees, but you could see the main road, Highway 42, cutting east-west. On it, a line of vehicles was building. Not moving, stopped. A chain of brake lights growing westward toward the interstate on-ramp. And behind the stopped cars, very small at this distance, shapes were moving in a way that didn't parse. Too fast, too angular, running in patterns that weren't flight, that were pursuit. "What is that?" I whispered. "Get in the truck." I got in the truck. Jonas climbed in after me, silent, his eyes on the highway. Bea pressed her face into my father's neck, oblivious. My father set her gently in the back seat, buckled her in with a precision that spoke of practice, and got behind the wheel. We drove the gravel road in silence. 2 minutes. The property opened around us, the north field with its overgrown grass, the tree line of Douglas fir marking the creek, and there, at the field's eastern edge, the equipment shed, a corrugated metal structure maybe 20 feet square. I'd seen it 100 times. I'd never asked what was inside, because my father had so many buildings, so many projects, so many structures that served no purpose I could identify. One more shed was just one more symptom. He parked beside it and killed the engine, sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a key. Not a regular key, something heavier, industrial. He held it in his palm and looked at it. "There's a hatch under the workbench," he said. "Goes down 18 feet. 2 rooms, ventilation rated for 8 people. Water from a capped well. Food stores rotated every 14 months. Generator with 600 gallons of diesel. Medical supplies. Communications equipment. Everything you need for 90 days. Dad, the key is yours." He placed it in my hand, closed my fingers around it. His hands were shaking. "It was always going to be yours." Then he pulled back his sleeve, and I saw the bandage on his forearm. Fresh gauze, already darkening at the center with something that wasn't the right color for regular blood. "I had to check something," he said. "An hour ago, on the south property line. There were already 3 of them in the creek bed. I needed to confirm, I needed to know for certain that what they were saying on the channels was real. That this wasn't..." He stopped, swallowed. "It's real, Ellie. And I got careless." The air left my lungs. "No," I said. "I'm not coming underground with you." I argued. Of course I argued. I argued in whispers because the children were in the back seat, and Jonas was already too still, already absorbing what he shouldn't have to absorb. I argued with my hands locked around the key and my father's blood not blood. Something darker seeping through his gauze while the light shifted toward amber and the distant highway grew more clogged, and the shapes I'd seen kept multiplying at the edge of vision. "You don't know," I said. "You don't know it's everyone reacts differently. You could be..." "I know, Ellie." His voice was patient, gentle in that way that frightened me worse than shouting. "I've been tracking this for 11 days on channels you don't know about. The window from contact to change is between 3 and 9 hours. I was bitten at 1:30. You do the math. Then we take you to a hospital. St. Francis is already locked down. Did Marcos tell you? That's not a chemical spill protocol. They've had 6 admissions since this morning. I listened to the staff frequency." He touched my face. His palm was warm, normal, living. "I built this for you, not for me. It was never for me." That's insane. You built it for 6 years, and you never planned to. I planned for everything I could control. I couldn't control this. He glanced at the back seat. Bea had fallen asleep, her head tilted against the window. Jonas was staring at us, at the bandage, at the key in my hand. His face was white. "Jonas," my father said. And his voice changed, became the grandfather voice, the one that had read stories and identified birds and let the boy drive the riding mower too young. "You're going to help your mom. You're the strongest 10-year-old I know." Jonas's chin trembled once. He pressed his lips together and nodded. "Dad," I said, "please." 3 hours, Ellie. I told you 3 hours, and we've used 40 minutes of it. You need to open that hatch. You need to get the children down. You need to learn the systems before... He stopped himself. Before dark. Before dark. Before he turned. Before the thing in his blood finished what it had started. He walked me to the shed, showed me the workbench, the hidden seam in the concrete floor, the hatch with its recessed lock. He talked me through the ventilation controls, the water pump primer, the radio frequencies scrawled in permanent marker on a card taped above the communications panel. He was methodical, calm, rehearsed. He had planned this briefing, had known, for all the years he'd known me, that this handoff would happen fast and frightened and incomplete, and had built redundancy into every system so that my gaps wouldn't kill me. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to collapse against him and weep. I wanted to go back 2 hours and answer the phone differently. None of these things were possible or useful. So instead I memorized what he told me, and I carried my sleeping daughter down the metal ladder, and I watched Jonas descend after me with his jaw locked and his hands steady on the rungs. My father stood at the top of the hatch, looking down at us in the fluorescent light he'd installed. His face was already different, not dramatically, not obviously, but the color had shifted, a grayish pallor advancing from his throat. "Marcos knows," he said. "I sent him coordinates. If he's smart and fast, he'll come." "Dad." "Close the hatch. Lock it from inside. Do not open it for me. Do not open it for my voice. Whatever you hear tonight, whatever it sounds like, that will not be me. I love you. I know you do. That's why you're here." He smiled. "That's why you answered the phone." He closed the hatch from above. I heard the workbench scrape back into position. Then nothing. Then silence so complete it had texture. The bunker was smaller than I expected. 2 rooms, a main space maybe 12 by 14 feet, and a secondary room half that size with 2 bunk beds built into the walls. Concrete floor, concrete ceiling, metal shelving on 3 walls packed with labeled bins. The air moved, I could hear the ventilation working, but it tasted recycled. Processed. Air with the memory of outside removed from it. Bea woke when I laid her on the lower bunk. "Where are we?" "Grandpa's surprise," I said. My voice held. I don't know how. "It's underground," Jonas said from the doorway. He'd already done a circuit of the main room. Already found the water dispenser, the emergency lights, the first aid cabinet. Already reading labels, processing, building his own map. Like a submarine, but under dirt. "I don't like it," Bea said. "I know, baby. We won't be here forever." That was the first lie I told underground. I didn't know it was a lie when I said it. I didn't know anything yet about how time works below the surface, how days lose their shape, how forever becomes a word you can no longer define because the metrics of before have been removed from you. I found the radio at 4:15. My father had labeled everything masking tape and permanent marker, his angular handwriting on every switch, every valve, every breaker. Main power. Water pump prime 3 times before first use. Radio emergency frequencies card above. I turned it on and scanned through the frequencies he'd listed. Most were dead air or static. One, a local emergency channel, carried fragments. A woman's voice, official sounding, saying something about designated shelters and highway closures. Then a burst of interference, and a man's voice underneath it, less composed. Not responding to barriers? Repeat, they are not responding to barriers. We need... Then nothing. On another frequency, what sounded like a CB radio conversation between 2 people I didn't know. How many at your position? 30, maybe 40, coming up the creek from town. We're bugging out. Jenny's loaded the trailer. Don't take 42, it's... Static ate the rest. I turned the volume low, sat on the floor with my back against the metal shelving, looked at the hatch above me, sealed, locked from my side. The key still in my hand, making a red impression on my palm from how tightly I'd held it. Marcos hadn't texted back. I checked my phone, 1 bar of signal, flickering. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. Tried texting. We're safe. Dad's property. Underground. Please come. The message sat unsent. No signal. 1 bar became 0. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Mom. Jonas appeared beside me. Quiet, watchful. There's food in the bins, rice and canned stuff, and water bottles, a lot of them. Good, that's good. How long are we staying? I don't know yet. He sat down beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel his warmth. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Above us, through 18 feet of earth and concrete, the world was changing in ways we couldn't see. Somewhere in that change, my father was changing too. And somewhere between here and St. Francis Hospital, my husband was or wasn't making his way to us. I had no way to know, no way to act. Only this key, this shelter, these children, and the instructions of a man I'd spent years resenting for exactly this, for always preparing for the thing that would never come. Until it came. Night was meaningless underground, but my phone said 9:47 p.m. when I heard the first sound above us. Not a knock, not a voice, a dragging. Something heavy being pulled across the shed floor above the hatch. Slow, deliberate, grinding, metal on concrete. Jonas sat up in his bunk instantly. Bay was asleep. I pressed my finger to my lips, and he nodded, eyes enormous in the dim light of the emergency LEDs. The dragging stopped. Silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then a sound I cannot adequately describe, something between a groan and an exhalation, but with harmonics in it that didn't belong to human vocal cords. Not a movie sound. Not what I'd imagined. Wetter, more intimate, like something learning how to use a throat it had recently acquired. Then a voice. My father's voice. His exact cadence, his exact tone. Ellie? It's cold out here. Let me in. Every cell in my body responded to that voice. Every year of childhood, every moment of trust and warmth and safety encoded in those particular frequencies. My hand moved toward the hatch lock before my conscious mind caught it. I pulled my arm back and held it against my chest with my other hand, physically restraining myself. Ellie, honey, I feel better. I think I was wrong about the bite. Open the door. Jonas was watching me. Not frightened, or yes, frightened, but also watchful in a way that was older than 10, watching to see what I would do, watching to see if his mother would hold. I held. The voice above tried 3 more times, each iteration slightly different tone, shifts, word choices, approaching the simulation of my father from different angles. The thing using his voice didn't know which version of him would unlock me. It tried the gentle father, the authoritative father, the apologetic father. Each one landed wrong by millimeters, the rhythm slightly off, the warmth slightly performed. Then it stopped trying language and started trying force. The hatch shuddered, once, twice, a third time with enough impact that dust sifted from the ceiling joints. B stirred but didn't wake. And then it left. I sat awake until the phone said 4 a.m. Jonas fell back asleep around midnight, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion while his face stayed tense. I sat with my back against the hatch and my hand on the lock, and I waited for the voice to come back. It didn't. At some point in those hours, I understood something that reorganized everything I thought I knew about my father. He had built this place knowing he might be what it protected us from. Not as an abstract possibility, as a specific, imagined scenario. He had stood in this shed and looked at this hatch and thought, if I am the danger. And he had built it strong enough to keep him out. 6 years of building a cage for himself. That was the love my father had for me. The kind that accounts for its own failure. 3 days underground. I'm going to tell you what nobody tells you about sealed survival. The hardest part isn't the fear. The fear is actually useful. It's fuel. It's attention. It's purpose. The hardest part is the absence of information. The not knowing. You can survive anything you can see. It's the invisible that dissolves you. I didn't know if Marcos was alive. I didn't know if my father's body was still above us, or if it had wandered off toward town. I didn't know if there were organized rescuers, if the military was coming, if Oregon still existed as a governed territory. The radio gave me fragments, bursts of signal between longer silences, and each fragment was a shard of a picture I couldn't assemble. What I did know, we had food for approximately 80 days at current consumption, water for longer with the well pump. The generator had fuel for 30 days of continuous operation, longer if I rationed power. The ventilation system was gravity-assisted and needed the generator only for filtration. We wouldn't suffocate, we wouldn't starve. Not quickly. But we were alone. My father had built this for me for us, and had taught no one else its location. There was no second key. No neighbor who'd been briefed. No community plan. Just a dead man's gift and his daughter's terrified competence. On day 3, Jonas said, "What if Dad doesn't know where to find us?" I'd been thinking the same thing. My father had said he sent Marcos coordinates. But Marcos's phone had been unreachable since before we descended. If he'd left the hospital, if he'd tried to drive here, he would have found the property but the shed, the hidden hatch, without someone to show him. "There's a marking," I said, hoping. I searched my father's notes, the laminated binder I'd found in the first hours. 60 pages of instructions, diagrams, contingencies. Page 43. External markers. A description of a paint mark on the shed's north face, a specific pattern, something Marcos would recognize if he knew to look. But did he know to look? Had my father ever told him? I couldn't remember. The years of strain between them, my father's preparations dismissed by Marcos as paranoia. Marcos's skepticism dismissed by my father as dangerous complacency had created silences. Things unsaid. Things that should have been shared and weren't, because pride is a structure too. And men build it as carefully as bunkers. "He'll find us," I told Jonas. Second lie underground. Day 7. B had stopped asking when we were leaving. This should have been a relief. The constant questioning had worn at me in ways I couldn't absorb, but its absence was worse. She had adapted. At 7 years old, she had accepted underground as normal. And that acceptance was a kind of damage I could measure but not prevent. She'd organized her bunk with items from the storage bins, a flashlight, a deck of cards she'd found, a Mylar emergency blanket she used as a play tent. She'd named the ventilation system, called the Hum Simon. Talked to it. At night, she told Simon about her day, what she'd eaten, what game she'd played with Jonas, what she dreamed. Jonas didn't adapt. Jonas resisted. He studied the binder with a focus that disturbed me, reading my father's technical notes about water purification, generator maintenance, security protocols. He asked questions I didn't want to answer. What does compromised perimeter mean? Why is there a section on body disposal? What's the plan if the ventilation fails? You don't need to worry about that. Someone does. He was right. And the someone was me. Only me. That was the thing my father's gift didn't account for, or maybe did account for, in the silence between his carefully labeled systems. He'd built this for a family, calibrated it for 8 people, designed it to be operated by a team, and instead, it held 1 adult and 2 children, and all the weight that should have been distributed across multiple hands settled entirely on mine. On day 7, I did my first surface check. My father's binder described the procedure. Dawn, minimal noise, visual reconnaissance only, 60 seconds maximum. The hatch had a small periscope, an actual periscope, like a submarine, which Jonas had discovered on day 2 that gave a narrow view of the shed interior and, through a crack in the wall, a sliver of the field beyond. I looked. The shed was empty. The workbench was in its original position. Whatever had disturbed it that first night had moved it back. Or something had. Through the wall crack, I could see the north field. Overgrown grass waving in wind, I couldn't feel. The tree line unchanged. The sky a particular blue that made my chest ache. And at the edge of the tree line, 3 figures standing motionless in the morning light. Not facing the shed, not facing anything, just standing. Still as posts, heads slightly tilted, like dogs hearing a frequency above human range. I pulled away from the periscope and breathed. They didn't know we were here. They were simply present, distributed across the landscape like a new species finding its range. I didn't tell Jonas what I'd seen. 3rd lie underground. The ledger was growing. Day 12. The radio gave me something real for the first time. I'd been scanning frequencies every morning and evening, my father's protocol, logged in the binder with specific times and channels, mostly static. Occasionally fragments that might have been voices or might have been electrical artifacts. Once, clearly, a child crying, which I turned off so fast I nearly broke the dial. But on day 12, at 6 a.m. on the frequency my father had labeled MIL-recovery, a clear transmission. A man's voice, unhurried, professional. This is FEMA Region 10 Field Coordination. Broadcast for occupied shelters within the mapped grid. Extraction corridor establishing along Route 38 North. Rally point at Ridgeline Community Center. Daily window 0600 to 0800. Acknowledge on this frequency if able. Repeat. And it repeated, word for word. Automated or disciplined enough to sound automated. Ridgeline Community Center, 2 miles south. The building where B had attended swim lessons last summer. I could see it in my mind, the blue cinder block, the parking lot with the cracked basketball hoop. 2 miles south. 40 minutes on foot. With 2 children. Past whatever stood between here and there. Past the figures at the tree line. Past whatever else occupied the ground between my father's field and town. I wrote down the transmission. Logged the time, the frequency, the exact wording. Then I sat with it for 3 hours before I told Jonas. His reaction surprised me. I expected excitement, a child's relief at the promise of rescue. Instead, he said, "How do we know it's real?" It was on the military frequency. Dad labeled it. Grandpa labeled it. That doesn't mean it's still. He stopped, looked away. Mom, if we leave here and it's not real, we can't get back. Not if they see us. He was right. The hatch was concealed, but not from close observation. If we attracted attention on the surface, if we ran, if we were chased, we'd lead them to the only safe place we had. The bunker's invisibility was its greatest defense, and leaving violated it permanently. But staying was its own death. Slower, quieter. The kind that looks like adaptation until you realize it's paralysis. We're going to verify first, I said. We're going to listen for 3 more days. If the broadcast repeats consistently at the same time, same frequency, same wording, that's a system. Systems mean organization. Organization means real. Jonas nodded, accepted this, went back to the binder. I didn't tell him the other thing I was waiting for. Marcos. 3 more days of checking the periscope at dawn. 3 more days of hoping to see a man's shape approaching the shed with intention rather than hunger. 3 more days before I accepted that my husband was either dead, turned, or somewhere I couldn't reach. 3 more days before I could make the decision I was already making. Day 15. The broadcast had repeated every morning for 3 consecutive days. Same voice, same words, same window. 0600 to 0800. Ridgeline Community Center. Route 38 North. I told Jonas we were leaving at 5 a.m. the next morning. He didn't argue. He'd already packed his grandfather's binder, a flashlight, 2 water bottles, the folding knife from the supply bin. I don't know when he'd started carrying the knife. I didn't ask. Bea received the news with the solemn blankness she'd adopted for all underground announcements. "Okay," she said. "Can I bring Simon?" She meant the ventilation hum, the sound she slept to, the only companion she'd made in 2 weeks of burial. "Simon stays to take care of the bunker," I said. "In case we come back?" "In case we come back." I didn't sleep that night. At 4 a.m., I did a final periscope check. The field was dark, pre-dawn, the tree line a black mass against a marginally lighter sky. I couldn't see the figures. That meant nothing. Couldn't see didn't mean weren't there, but it was the best window I was going to get. At 5 o'clock, I unlocked the hatch. The sound of the mechanism was enormous in the silence, metal on metal, engineered for security, not stealth. I froze, listened. Nothing responded. I pushed the hatch up 6 inches. Air hit me, real air, outside air, carrying pine and damp earth and something underneath those things that I identified only later as decomposition. Not strong, not close, but present in the atmosphere like a new baseline. I climbed out first. The shed was dark and cold. The workbench sat undisturbed, its surface layered with dust except where the hatch mechanism had cleared an arc. The shed door was closed. I opened it 1 inch. The field lay silver and empty under a half moon. I went back and lifted Bea up through the hatch. Then Jonas, who climbed out himself with the binder zipped inside his jacket. I closed the hatch, locked it, put the key in my pocket, and felt its weight like a decision made irreversible. We moved south through the field in single file. Me first, Bea in the middle holding the back of my jacket, Jonas at the rear. No flashlight. The moon gave just enough. The grass was wet and tall enough to brush Bea's shoulders. Every step made sound the whisper of seed heads against fabric, the squelch of damp earth. I'd never heard myself move so loudly. At the tree line, I stopped. This was where I'd seen them. 3 figures standing. Morning after morning through the periscope, in slightly different positions, but always present. Always at this margin between field and forest. They weren't there now. The space they'd occupied was just space, trees and undergrowth, and the sound of the creek running south toward town. I waited 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing moved. We crossed into the trees. The creek path ran roughly parallel to Ridgeline Road, separated by 50 yards of forest. My father had walked this path with me when I was a child, showing me where the steelhead spawned in November, where the otters built their slides, where you could find chanterelles after the first October rain. I knew it by touch almost, by the rhythm of roots and stones underfoot. In the dark before dawn, with my children pressed close and my ears reaching for any sound that didn't belong, it was alien. Every shadow was a shape. Every branch crack was a footstep. The creek itself normally a comfort. Its sound masking our movement also masked what might have been moving parallel to us. 20 minutes in, Jonas gripped my shoulder. I stopped. He pointed east, through the trees, toward where Ridgeline Road would be. A car, overturned on the shoulder, its headlights still on, pointing into the tree canopy like searchlights aimed at heaven. In their illumination, I could see the pavement. And on the pavement, shapes. Not standing this time, crouched. 4 or 5, clustered around something on the ground that I refused to identify. Bea couldn't see from her height. Jonas could. His grip on my shoulder tightened, but he made no sound. I redirected us west, away from the road, deeper into the trees. We'd approached the community center from behind, through the old lumber mill lot. Longer route, more cover. The detour cost us 30 minutes. By the time we reached the lumber mill's chain-link perimeter, the sky had lightened from black to iron gray. Dawn was close. The extraction window opened at 0600. My phone nearly dead. No signal said 5:43. The lumber mill was abandoned. Had been for years. But as we skirted its fence line, heading south, I saw that someone had been here recently. A vehicle had driven through the grass, leaving compressed tracks leading to the loading bay. The bay door was partially raised. Inside darkness. We kept moving. I didn't investigate. Every building was a choice, and every choice carried risk, and I had 17 minutes to cover the last quarter mile. The community center appeared as the sky shifted toward gray-blue. The same blue cinder block, the same parking lot. But the parking lot held vehicles: 3 military trucks, an ambulance, 2 civilian cars. And around the perimeter, a fence had been erected. Temporary chain link topped with wire, enclosing the lot and the building in a defensive rectangle. A floodlight hit us. Stop, identify. A voice from behind the fence, male, young, strained. My name is Eleanor Voss. These are my children. We heard the broadcast. Silence. Then the sound of a gate. A real gate, a section of fence on hinges, and a soldier appeared. National Guard from the patch on his shoulder. Couldn't have been older than 22. He had a rifle, but it was pointed at the ground. And his face, when the floodlight illuminated it, was exhausted and relieved in equal measure. How many with you? Just us 3. He looked behind us, into the trees we'd emerged from. His eyes tracked the darkness with a practiced vigilance that told me he'd seen things come out of those trees before. Inside, he said, quickly. The community center had been transformed. The swimming pool was drained and covered with plywood, creating additional floor space. The lobby served as intake a folding table, a medic with a flashlight checking our eyes, our skin, asking when we last had contact with an infected individual. 15 days ago, I said. My father. He was bitten. He didn't come underground with us. The medic noted this, checked our arms, our necks, behind our ears. You've been sealed since? Yes. Good. You're clean. Clean. As if what had happened to us was something that could be washed away. The main gymnasium held approximately 40 people. Families, mostly. A few singles, everyone arranged in clusters around bedrolls and bags. The geometry of trust made visible in how close people slept to one another. Some looked up when we entered. Most didn't. Fatigue had flattened their curiosity. B pressed against my leg. I don't like it here either, she whispered. I know. A woman approached mid-40s, short hair, clipboard. I'm Sergeant Chen. We're running evac convoys to the Salem Recovery Zone every 48 hours. Next one leaves tomorrow at 0600. You're on the list. How far is Salem? 90 miles. 4-hour drive normally. Currently 8 to 10 with detours. She looked at B, at Jonas. Something softened microscopically. There's food at the back table. Water station by the locker rooms. Stay inside the fence line. Do not go outside after dark. My husband, I said. Marcos Voss. He worked at St. Francis Hospital. Is there any way to... We don't have contact with St. Francis, she said. The hospital was overrun on day 2. She said it without inflection, not cruelty economy. She'd delivered this type of information many times. We have a registry. I'll add your name and his. If he reaches any rally point in the network, you'll be matched. If, not when. I took the children to the back table. Crackers, canned fruit, water in paper cups. B ate as if she'd been starving, though I'd fed her well underground. Jonas picked at his food and watched the room, cataloging, assessing, reading the 40 strangers around us the way he'd read my father's binder. Mom, he said quietly. That soldier at the gate. He was scared. Everyone's scared, buddy. No, he was scared of what's coming next, not what's already here. I looked at the gate guard through the gymnasium's high windows. He stood at the fence line, facing outward, his posture rigid in the growing light. And beyond him, in the trees at the parking lot's edge, I could see the shapes again. Standing, watching, patient as geography. They knew we were here. They knew about the fence, the lights, the guns. And they waited anyway. The convoy left at 0600 sharp the next morning. 3 vehicles, 2 military trucks, and an armored van. 43 civilians packed into the truck beds with canvas overhead, sitting on benches that faced inward, knees touching strangers' knees. B sat in my lap. Jonas sat beside me, his body rigid, his hand in mine for the first time in months. He'd decided he was too old for hand-holding around Christmas. Now he held on as if my fingers were structural. Sergeant Chen rode in the cab of the lead truck. 4 armed guards distributed across the convoy. I counted the guns, because counting was something I could do. The route avoided Highway 42 entirely. We went north first, away from Salem, away from everything looping through Forest Service roads that climbed into logging territory before descending on the far side of the ridge. Someone had cleared these roads recently. I could see fresh chainsaw cuts on fallen trees pushed to the shoulders, bark still weeping sap. For the first hour, nothing happened. The forest passed in green and gray monotony. People in the truck bed didn't speak. A woman across from me held an infant who slept with that absolute commitment only newborns possess. An older man clutched a briefcase as if its contents still mattered. A teenage girl with a bandage on her neck stared at nothing with eyes that had stopped recording. Then the convoy stopped. No announcement, no warning. Just the sudden absence of motion and the engine dropping to idle. Everyone stiffened simultaneously, a collective intake of breath that consumed all the oxygen in the truck bed. Through the gap in the canvas, I could see the road ahead. The lead truck had stopped at a junction where the logging road met a county highway. Across the highway, blocking the route south, was a barricade. Not military, civilian. Cars turned sideways, a tractor, wooden pallets stacked between. And behind the barricade, people, living people, standing in a line with weapons that ranged from hunting rifles to baseball bats. Sergeant Chen's voice, amplified by a megaphone. Federal evacuation convoy. Clear the road. A man's voice from behind the barricade, unamplified but carrying. No one's coming through here. Not with a load of people we can't verify. Turn around. These are verified civilians, screened and... We don't recognize your screening. We've seen what comes through looking normal. Turn your trucks around. I couldn't see Chen's face, but I could hear the mathematics she was performing. Force the barricade with military vehicles and firearms? Possible, but messy, unpredictable. Civilians on both sides. And the people behind those cars weren't infected. They were afraid. Armed and afraid, and making the calculations of the new world. That living strangers might be worse than dead ones, because living strangers made choices you couldn't predict. Alternate route, Chen announced over the radio. The trucks began a 3-point turn on the narrow road. B whimpered against my chest. Jonas said nothing. His hand tightened in mine. The detour added 3 hours to our journey. 3 hours during which we passed through terrain that showed the outbreak's progression in strata first, the empty farms with their gates open and livestock loose. Then the burned structures whose blackened frames reached upward like fingers. Then the stretches of road where abandoned vehicles formed a maze our drivers navigated with practiced precision. And between these landmarks, the wanderers. Singles and clusters, moving without apparent purpose along the road's edges, turning their heads as we passed, but not pursuing. Not yet pursuing. Salem wasn't a city anymore. It was a perimeter. The recovery zone occupied the state fairgrounds, a massive fenced area with existing infrastructure that someone had militarized with impressive speed. Guard towers at intervals. Concrete barriers where the old ticket booths had been. Floodlights on scaffolding that turned night into a permanent gray noon. We arrived at 3 p.m. Processing took 2 hours. Medical screening again more thorough this time. Blood draws, temperature checks. The medics wearing full PPE that made them look less like healers than hazard. A woman photographed us and entered our names into a laptop. I gave Marcos's information again. Name, physical description, last known location. St. Francis was overrun day 2, she said, the same words Chen had used. But we've had survivors from there trickle in. Some made it to the Corvallis point. I'll flag your file. Flag, file. Language that meant, we will try, but do not expect. The fairgrounds housed approximately 3,000 people. We were assigned to a livestock building, concrete floor, metal walls, fluorescent lights never turned off. Cots in rows with 18 inches between them. A family of 4 on our left. A man alone on our right who didn't speak and didn't meet anyone's eyes. B asked for Simon. For the hum. For the sound that meant safety. I held her and hummed until she slept. It wasn't the same. She knew it wasn't the same. She slept anyway, because children eventually choose sleep over grief. Jonas didn't sleep. He sat on his cot with the binder in his lap, his grandfather's binder. 60 pages of a dead man's careful planning. And he read by the fluorescent light that would never be turned off. He read as if the answers to what came next were in those pages. Maybe they were. My father had built for contingencies I hadn't imagined. Maybe somewhere in those diagrams was a map for this, for after the bunker, after the convoy, after the perimeter, for how to live in the world that the outbreak made. "Mom," Jonas said at some point past midnight. "Page 58. I leaned over. Page 58 was a hand-drawn map. My father's property. The equipment shed marked with a star. And radiating outward from it, dotted lines paths to locations labeled with codes I didn't recognize. Small squares drawn at the end of each line. 6 of them, distributed across the 40 acres. He built more than one, Jonas said. I stared at the map. 6 structures. Underground, presumably. 6 separate caches or shelters or supply points that I hadn't known about. That I'd walked above for years without knowing. My father hadn't built a bunker. He'd built a network. An infrastructure for return. As if he always knew that leaving would be temporary and coming back would be necessary. As if he understood. In that way, only the truly prepared understand. That survival isn't a destination. It's a circuit. You go out, you come back, you go out again. The key in my pocket wasn't just a key. It was the starting point of a system I was only beginning to see. My father had spent 6 years building something that exceeded any single use, any single crisis, any single daughter and her 2 children in the dark. He'd built the skeleton of a future. And he'd handed me the first bone of it 3 hours before his own ended. I touched the map, traced the dotted lines with my finger. Felt, for the first time since his voice onto the phone, something that wasn't grief or fear. "We're going back," Jonas said. Not a question. "Yeah," I said. "When it's safe enough, we're going back." 6 weeks later, Marcos walked into the Salem recovery zone carrying nothing but a hospital badge and a limp. He found our names on the registry. He found us in the livestock building. He said he'd walked for 19 days. He said the hospital fell in an hour. He said he'd survived because he was in the basement pulling films when the upper floors went, and the basement had a service tunnel that led to the maintenance parking lot. I held him and felt the key in my pocket press between us, my father's gift. Hard and specific and waiting. We didn't talk about what happened next, not that night. That night, we just held our children between us and breathed the air that tasted like livestock and disinfectant and 3,000 strangers and somehow, against all odds, also like future. But I know what happens next. Jonas knows too. He's already memorizing the map. My father handed me a key. He handed it to me, already dying, already past any use he'd have for it himself. And the key opened more than a hatch in a concrete floor. It opened the understanding that love, his kind of love, the kind that builds in silence, that prepares without being asked, that accounts for its own absence, doesn't end when the builder does. It just transfers.